What the Sinaloa cartel didn't know when they threatened to burn down John Miller's farmland was that the quiet man in muddy overalls had logged more confirmed kills than any Delta operator in history. The farmer simply smiled as his weathered hands reached for the hidden compartment beneath his tractor seat. What do you think is going to happen? As dawn bathed Montana's Bitterroot Valley in golden hues, John Miller walked along his fence line, his weathered hands inspecting each post with careful, methodical precision. At 63, his movements carried the deliberate efficiency of age, but his pale blue eyes missed nothing. The black SUV had passed his property for the third time that morning. Fresh tire tracks marked the ground near his south gate, and a subtle disturbance in the tall grass hinted at someone watching his house. His 100-acre spread wasn't much compared to the big ranches, but it was his. 20 years of quiet farming had transformed the property into exactly what he needed, though not for the reasons his neighbors assumed. The high ridge backing his land offered clear views of the valley. His carefully planted tree lines provided perfect concealment. Even the seemingly random placement of his equipment served specific purposes. "Morning, Mr. Miller," Jimmy Watson called from his passing tractor. The teenager saw only a modest farmer's pickup, not the reinforced suspension and bulletproof glass. Didn't notice how John's casual wave included a precise scan of the tree line behind the boy's father's property. The black SUV made another pass. Mexican plates, tinted windows. Cartel scouts, evaluating territory for expansion. They'd been pushing up from the south, using remote farms as distribution points. Last week, the Peterson place 2 valleys over had mysteriously burned down after Old Man Peterson refused to sell. John continued his fence check, every step measured. His apparent limp, developed over decades of cultivating a harmless appearance, concealed the fact that he could still run a sub-6-minute mile. The battered John Deere cap and faded work clothes masked the fitness of a man who had never stopped training. His special modifications to the property remained invisible to casual observation. The grain silo's height had been calculated precisely. Key positions were ranged and logged. His morning walks maintained both fence line and familiarization with distance markers he'd spent years establishing. The sound of approaching vehicles drew his attention. 2 more SUVs, same make as the first. They slowed as they passed his front gate. John kept checking his fence, appearing to ignore them. But his mind automatically cataloged details: 3 men per vehicle, visible bulges of shoulder holsters, tactical positioning of passengers. They saw an old farmer, slightly stooped, methodically doing his morning chores. Didn't notice how his stance kept his right hand free, or how his position offered clear sight lines in 3 directions. Certainly couldn't know they were looking at the man who still held Delta Force's record for confirmed eliminations at extreme range. John straightened slowly, rubbing his back like any aging farmer might. The SUVs pulled away, but he knew they'd be back. The cartel was moving into the valley, and his farm sat at a strategic choke point. They would try to buy him out first, like they had with Peterson. When that failed, they'd attempt intimidation. He looked out over his peaceful fields, knowing each distance by heart. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, making him look every bit his 63 years. Perfect. Let them see age, wear, and weariness. Let them mistake decades of experience for vulnerability. The quiet life he'd built here was about to change. But that's what the cartel didn't understand. This peaceful farm had been built by a warrior who had never stopped preparing for war. John Miller's weathered hands moved methodically, cleaning his old tractor's spark plugs with the same precision he once used to maintain his custom-built Macmillan AC 338 sniper rifle. Behind his barn, carefully hidden beneath rotating irrigation equipment, lay the 1,000-yard range he'd built into his back 40. Not for nostalgia, for necessity. Skills like his needed maintenance, even after 20 years of farming. The morning sun caught his eye as he worked, triggering memories of another dawn, another time. Kandahar Province, 2003. The shot that made him a legend in Delta Force, 2,474 meters. At the time, the longest confirmed kill in Special Operations history. The target had been a high-level Taliban commander. The variables had been impossible: 15-knot crosswind, 37-degree temperature gradient, extreme elevation angle. But impossible shots had been his specialty. He'd chosen this farm carefully after retirement. The rolling Montana terrain offered natural shooting lanes disguised as crop rows. His grain silos, positioned with mathematical precision, provided elevated positions with interlocking fields of fire. Even his irrigation ditches had been dug to military dimensions, perfect for concealed movement under fire. "Been a while, Shadow," a familiar voice called from his driveway. Colonel Iron Mike Thompson, his old commanding officer, now retired in Great Falls. The colonel still used his Delta Force call sign, a name earned because targets never saw him coming. "Just checking those fence posts you mentioned," Mike said casually, their old code for sharing intelligence. "Cartel's moving big shipments through the valley. Local police are compromised." John nodded, continuing to work on his tractor. His record in Delta Force wasn't just about that one shot in Kandahar. 278 confirmed eliminations, 43 of them beyond 1,500 meters. Shots that had changed the course of operations, saved countless lives, earned him a reputation that still caused whispers in special operations circles. "Your farm's strategic," Mike continued. "High ground overlooking 3 major routes. Natural choke points. They'll want it." John's hands stilled on the spark plug. He built this place for peace, for quiet. But he built it prepared for war. Every morning, despite his age, he still put 5 rounds through his custom rifle at extreme range. Still maintained his observation logs, recording wind patterns and terrain changes. Old habits that might become relevant again. "You've still got friends," Mike added quietly. "If things go bad." John merely nodded. The cartel didn't know they were threatening the man whose skills had once made him death incarnate at ranges other snipers called impossible. Didn't know the quiet farmer's hands could still put rounds on target at distances that defied physics. The old colonel left as quietly as he'd arrived. John returned to his tractor maintenance, but his mind was already calculating fields of fire, remembering formulas for extreme range shooting in mountain air. He'd chosen farming for peace. But if war came to his land, he was prepared to remind the world why Delta Force snipers still studied his techniques, still spoke of Shadow with reverence. His peaceful retirement might be ending. But if the cartel forced his hand, they'd learn what the Taliban had learned in Kandahar, that underestimating old men could be fatal, especially when that old man held every long-range shooting record in Delta Force history. Morning dew still clung to John Miller's wheat fields when the black SUVs appeared on his access road. His weathered hands never paused in their work, maintaining the careful image of an aging farmer too focused on fixing his tractor to notice the approaching threat. But decades of combat experience had already counted vehicles, assessed approach vectors, and noted the telltale bulges of concealed weapons under expensive jackets. 3 vehicles, 8 men. Professional stance and movement patterns suggesting military or law enforcement background. The lead SUV stopped precisely 50 meters from where John worked, close enough to appear intimidating while maintaining tactical response distance. "Mr. Miller." The leader emerged, designer sunglasses and cartel tattoos barely visible beneath his collar. "We represent a development company interested in your property." John straightened slowly, playing up the stiffness in his back that came with age. His apparent struggle to stand masked the perfect firing positions he'd already identified. "Not interested in selling," he replied, keeping his voice tired and resigned. "This land's been in my family 3 generations." 2 more men approached, flanking their leader with practiced precision. Their casual stance was textbook cartel enforcement, appearing relaxed while maintaining optimal firing positions. John recognized the pattern from briefings he'd given to Delta Force on cartel tactics, back when he'd held the unit's record for confirmed eliminations of high-value targets. "Sir, with respect, you should consider our offer." The leader's smile never reached his eyes. "Development is coming to this valley. Prices will only go down. We're prepared to be very generous." John's gnarled hands gripped his work rag, the same grip he'd once used to steady his rifle for a 1,600-meter shot that still held the unit record. "Like you were generous with a Peterson place?" He kept his tone mild, non-threatening. "Heard they had some accidents before selling." The leader's smile tightened. One hand moved subtly, signaling his men to spread out. They were good, professional. But John had already noted their weapon positions, calculated firing angles, factored in the morning wind that rustled his wheat fields at 8 knots from the northwest. "Accidents happen, Mr. Miller." The threat in the leader's voice was clear, especially to stubborn old men who don't recognize opportunity. John nodded slowly, maintaining his elderly farmer facade. Then, with deliberate casualness, he picked up a rock and tossed it toward his south field. The rock landed exactly 400 meters out, triggering a motion sensor he'd hidden months ago. The sharp crack of a rifle shot followed instantly, kicking up dirt precisely 6 inches from the leader's expensive shoes. The cartel men reacted with professional speed, weapons appearing. But John's voice, suddenly stripped of its elderly waver, froze them in place. That shot was from my back 40. Shooter you never saw, never will see. Next one's half an inch lower, half a second faster. The leader's face showed the first signs of uncertainty. John pressed his advantage, voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded Delta Force's most elite sniper unit. 2 more shooters have your vehicles targeted. Development company, cartel enforcers, doesn't matter. This land isn't for sale. The carefully orchestrated show of force had taken months to prepare. Motion sensors, prearranged markers, and a morning schedule he maintained until the cartel thought they knew his routine. The illusion of multiple shooters was perfect, though in truth, there was only John Miller, his rifles, and decades of experience making the impossible look easy. Consider this a professional courtesy, John finished, his weathered farmer's face now showing hints of the operator beneath. There won't be a second warning. John Miller's weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as he welded another concealed gun port into his grain silo's western wall. To any passing cartel scouts, he appeared to be doing routine maintenance. They wouldn't notice how each modification aligned perfectly with predetermined fields of fire, or how the new ventilation holes offered perfect sniper positions with views of every approach to his property. The morning sun cast long shadows across his 200 acres as he surveyed his work. 20 years of farming had transformed this land into more than just agricultural ground. Every irrigation ditch now doubled as a covered movement route. Each equipment shed contained cache supplies and emergency ammunition. The old grain auger, carefully positioned, could be rotated to provide an elevated firing position covering the main access road. Just fixing some rust spots, he called out cheerfully to the suspicious SUV that slowed as it passed his property. His elderly farmer act was perfect, slightly stooped shoulders, deliberate movements suggesting age rather than tactical precision. They didn't notice how he marked their vehicle's details, cataloging it with others that had been monitoring his farm. In his barn, beneath crates of farm supplies, his old Delta Force range kit remained meticulously maintained. Rangefinder, wind meters, ballistic calculators, tools that had once helped him set long-distance kill records in Afghanistan, now served to map every inch of his property. Each distance was measured, each elevation change noted, every potential cover position marked. The irrigation pipe he was supposedly repairing offered a perfect prone firing position, aligned exactly with the valley's prevailing winds. He'd spent years adjusting his farm's layout, making subtle changes that seemed agricultural but served tactical purposes. The terraced northern field wasn't just for better water management. It provided elevated firing positions with clear lines of sight to all approaches. His tractor, deliberately parked near the western fence line, had been carefully modified. Its heavy frame could stop most small arms fire, while the cab offered a stabilized platform for precise shots. The cartel wouldn't realize its significance until it was too late. As evening approached, John checked the concealed pressure plates he'd installed along the access roads. Any nighttime visitors would trigger silent alerts, giving him crucial advance warning. The old windmill, which neighbors thought he kept for nostalgia, contained state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, its height offering perfect observation of the surrounding valley. In his workshop, disguised as ordinary farm tools, components for his favorite Macmillan AC 338 sniper rifle waited for assembly. He'd learned in Delta Force that the best weapons were the ones enemies never saw coming. Just like they'd never understand how his carefully planned crop rotation created clear lanes of fire while appearing completely natural. Getting ready for harvest, he told the local feed store owner, buying supplies that would actually be used to fortify his positions. Years of preparation were finally serving their purpose. The cartel thought they were pushing around an old farmer. Instead, they were walking into a carefully prepared killing ground, designed by one of the deadliest snipers in Delta Force history. The sun set over his Montana farm as John made his final evening checks. To anyone watching, he looked like any other farmer securing his property for the night. They couldn't know that every aspect of his farm had been designed for this moment, every seemingly innocent agricultural feature concealing a tactical advantage that would soon prove fatal to those who threatened his land. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the eastern ridge when John Miller found his first dead cow. The precision of the kill shot told him everything he needed to know this wasn't random vandalism. The bullet had struck exactly where it would cause the most suffering before death. A message, delivered with calculated cruelty. From his position by the fallen animal, John's experienced eyes tracked the shooter's likely position, a ridge 400 yards east. Amateur work compared to the shots he'd made in his Delta Force days, but professional enough to concern him. The cartel was done playing games. His weathered hands moved automatically, measuring wind speed with falling grass, calculating distance and elevation with the practiced ease of thousands of similar assessments. The shooter had been good, but had left signs a master sniper could read like a book: crushed grass, scattered brass, even a cigarette butt. Sloppy. Quite a mess you got there, John, Sheriff Mike Davies called from his approaching patrol car. The local law meant well, but was hopelessly outmatched by what was coming. Want to file a report? Just a random shooting, John replied, maintaining his careful facade of simple farmer. But his mind was already calculating fields of fire, preparing defensive positions. The cartel had just changed the rules of engagement. A dust trail on the distant road caught his attention, 3 black SUVs moving with tactical precision. They weren't bothering to hide their presence anymore. Through his peripheral vision, John spotted movement in his south field, observers watching his reaction to their escalation. Might want to stay clear of my property for a few days, Mike, John suggested quietly. Could be more random shootings. The warning in his voice made the sheriff pause. In their 3 years of friendship, he'd never heard that tone from the old farmer. As the patrol car pulled away, John walked his property with seemingly casual slowness. Each step was precisely measured, marking ranges to potential cover, identifying optimal firing positions. Behind his barn, concealed by years of careful preparation, his personal range had already helped him map every inch of the surrounding terrain. The cartel wanted to play sniper games with the deadliest shot in Delta Force history. Looking at his dead livestock, John felt an old familiar calm settling over him. They thought they were escalating. They didn't realize they were just setting up targets. A shot cracked across the valley, another cow down, this time at 600 yards. Shows. John's experienced ear tracked the sound signature, calculated the position, and identified the rifle make from the report. Good equipment, amateur execution. He'd chosen this land carefully when retiring, setting up his farm to take advantage of natural shooting lanes and defensive positions. Now, as the morning sun finally crested the ridge, John Miller began preparing for the next phase of a very different kind of harvest. The cartel had just made their fatal mistake. They'd brought a sniper game to a Delta Force legend's carefully prepared killing ground. And they were about to learn why John Miller's confirmed kill record would never be broken. Moonlight painted silver edges on John Miller's wheat fields as he watched the first cartel vehicles approach his farm. From his position in the converted grain silo, his weathered hands cradled his custom M24 with the same steadiness that had once made him a legend in Delta Force. The radio scanner beside him crackled with Spanish voices. They weren't even bothering to mask their communications. Through his scope, he counted 12 men in the first wave. Their tactical formation showed military training, but their confidence betrayed their fatal mistake. They thought they were attacking an old farmer's homestead. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully prepared kill zone. The wheat field's irrigation ditches, which he'd spent 30 years maintaining, now channeled their approach exactly where he wanted them. Each fence post had been measured precisely, range markers that appeared completely innocent to the untrained eye. He'd calculated every shot possibility years ago, plotting them the same notebook where he tracked crop rotations. "Take the farm tonight," a voice commanded in Spanish over their radio. "The old man can't stop all of us." John allowed himself a small smile, remembering similar overconfidence from insurgent forces in his Delta days. His finger rested beside the trigger, not yet touching it, just as he'd done on over 300 confirmed eliminations. The first shot, when it came, was pure mathematics. Range, 643 yards. Wind, 8 knots from the northwest. Temperature, 54 degrees. Humidity, 65%. The cartel's point man never heard the round that struck him. One moment he was advancing, the next he was down. Pure, clean, professional. Chaos erupted as they sought cover, but John had already moved to his second position. The barn's ventilation window offered different angles, different calculations. Through his scope, he watched their confusion turn to fear as they realized their opponent was no ordinary farmer. "He's got military training," someone shouted over their radio. "Sniper." John's second shot answered their revelation, another clean elimination at 775 yards. In the grain silo where he'd started, a remote control recording played the sound of cycling bolt, making them think he was still there while he engaged from new positions. The cartel forces tried to advance through his western field, but the carefully arranged farm equipment, tractors, plows, old trucks, forced them into predictable channels. Each piece had been positioned over years, appearing random while creating perfect interlocking fields of fire. Through his night vision, John watched them make every mistake he'd anticipated. They bunched up behind cover that didn't protect against his elevated positions. They exposed themselves crossing gaps he'd measured precisely. They fought like men used to having superior numbers and firepower. But against a Delta Force sniper defending prepared ground, those advantages meant nothing. 4 more shots for more eliminations. Each one carefully placed, each one sending a message. This wasn't just about stopping their attack. This was about making them understand that his farm, his home, was a death trap for those who meant harm. As the survivors finally broke and ran, John chambered one last round. The shot went through the radiator of their lead vehicle at 932 yards, his way of saying he could have taken more of them if he'd wanted to. A warning written in precision rifle fire. In the aftermath, as distant engines faded into the night, John maintained his vigil. The farm's silence returned, broken only by the gentle rustle of wheat in the evening breeze. But now the cartel knew. The old farmer they dismissed was something far more dangerous. And this had been just a warning. In a dimly lit hotel room 50 miles from John Miller's farm, Cartel Lieutenant Miguel Herrera stared at the file his contact had just delivered. Surveillance photos of the old farmer were spread across the bed, but it was the classified military documents that made his hands tremble. El Fantasma, the ghost. 27 confirmed kills over 2,000 meters. 43 missions that officially never happened. The deadliest sniper in Delta Force history. Impossible, Miguel muttered, but the evidence was undeniable. That quiet old man tending his wheat fields had once eliminated a terrorist leader from 2,431 meters in a sandstorm. The shot had become legend in special operations circles, though few knew the shooter's identity. His phone buzzed, another casualty report. 3 more men lost trying to approach the farm last night. Each shot had been perfect, impossible in the darkness, yet delivered with surgical precision. Now he understood why. "Get me Santiago," he ordered his lieutenant. The cartel's chief enforcer would need to know they weren't dealing with some stubborn farmer. They were facing a man who had rewritten the books on long-range combat. Through his laptop, Miguel watched live feed from the surveillance cameras hidden around Miller's property. The old man was out checking his irrigation lines, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who'd spent decades farming. But now Miguel saw what they'd all missed, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, how he never presented a clear target, his precise understanding of terrain and cover. "We lost 12 men already," Santiago's voice growled through the phone. "To a farmer." "Not just a farmer," Miguel corrected, reading from the file. "Ghost Force. Pre-9/11 operations. Afghanistan. Iraq. Places that don't exist on maps. Specialized in impossible shots that couldn't be traced." Silence on the line as Santiago processed this. They thought the farm was strategic just for its location along their smuggling route. Now it was clear Miller had chosen this land for different reasons. Every rolling hill, every tree line, every irrigation ditch had been carefully selected to create perfect firing positions. "He's 63 years old," Santiago said finally. "Past his prime." Miguel watched Miller disappear into his barn. "Age just means more experience." Says here his last confirmed kill was a Somali warlord at 2,315 meters. That was the day he retired. 15 years ago. Through the surveillance feed, Miguel saw Miller emerge from his barn. Something was different in his movements now, more deliberate, focused. He'd spotted their new cameras. "We'll need professionals," Santiago decided. "Real mercenaries, not just street soldiers." On screen, Miller stopped and looked directly into the hidden camera. His weathered face showed no emotion as he raised one hand in a gesture Miguel recognized from combat training. Range estimation. Distance calculation. Warning. The camera went dead. "He's sending a message," Miguel realized. "He knows we know who he is now." "Good," Santiago growled. "No more games. We'll show this old man what real cartel warfare looks like." But Miguel wasn't so confident. The file's last page contained a warning that made his blood run cold. Subject demonstrates unique ability to convert any terrain into sniper's paradise. Recommend extreme caution in any engagement on ground of his choosing. And John Miller had chosen this ground very carefully indeed. Dawn painted Montana's sky in shades of purple and gold as John Miller performed his final equipment check. His custom M24 rifle, maintained with the same care he showed his tractors, lay ready beside 5 others in the converted grain silo. Each weapon was zeroed for different ranges, allowing him to engage targets across his entire property without adjusting scopes. The cartel's vehicles appeared on schedule, their headlights cutting through morning mist that rolled across his fields. John counted 12 SUVs, all moving in tactical formation. Their professional approach confirmed his suspicions. These weren't ordinary cartel soldiers. They brought in specialists. Through his spotting scope, he identified military-grade weapons and body armor. The men moved with the distinctive precision of former Special Forces operators. Mercenaries, probably ex-military, hired specifically to eliminate the old farmer who'd humiliated the cartel's regular forces. Should have done better research, John muttered, calculating wind vectors across his wheat field. He'd spent 15 years preparing this land, each feature of his farm designed with tactical considerations. The irrigation ditches that kept his crops healthy also provided perfect concealment for movement. The scattered farm equipment offered pre-ranged distance markers. The first shot, when it came, was pure Delta Force precision. 940 yards, crosswind at 12 knots, humidity affecting ballistics exactly as calculated. The mercenary team leader fell without a sound, their perfect formation suddenly headless. Chaos erupted as the professionals sought cover, but John had predicted every possible position. Each piece of farm equipment they dove behind had been carefully placed to create interlocking fields of fire. The grain silos weren't just storage. They were hardened firing positions with pre-cut gun ports. Distance is your friend, he taught countless Delta Force recruits. Make them come to you through terrain you control. Now those lessons played out across his own fields. Each attempted advance meant long-range precision fire. Every tactical approach they'd been trained to use became a fatal funnel. 3 mercenaries tried moving through his cornfield. John switched to his close-range rifle, already zeroed for that sector. 3 shots, 3 kills. The corn rows he'd planted at precise intervals had created perfect shooting lanes. Their radio chatter, picked up by equipment hidden in his scarecrow, betrayed growing frustration. They'd expected to overwhelm an elderly farmer. Instead, they were being systematically eliminated by someone who knew every inch of the battlefield, because he'd spent years farming it. A truck tried ramming his front gate. The shot that disabled it came from over 1,000 yards, a distance that would have made headlines in his Delta Force days. Now it was just another part of defending his home. The remaining mercenaries attempted to fall back, professional discipline crumbling in the face of unseen death. But retreat meant crossing open ground. John had prepared for exactly this moment. Each shot found its mark with mechanical precision, his years of experience making impossible shots look routine. In less than 20 minutes, it was over. The morning mist began burning away, revealing the cost of underestimating a Delta Force legend. John began his post-firing ritual, cleaning each weapon with the same methodical care he showed his farm tools. The cartel had made a fatal mistake, bringing war to a man who'd spent his life mastering it. His fields would need attention after this. Brass to collect, soil to tend, crops to maintain. But that was fine. He was a farmer now, after all. Just one who happened to be the deadliest sniper in Delta Force history. Dawn painted Montana's rolling hills in shades of gold as John Miller settled into his primary hide, a carefully crafted position within his north grain silo. The morning dew had created perfect conditions, steady barometric pressure, minimal mirage effect, wind holding at 6 knots from the northwest. His weathered hands moved across his rifle with familiar precision, each motion perfected through decades of experience. Through his scope, he watched cartel vehicles attempting to establish positions along his farm's perimeter. Their tactics were good, professional even, but they didn't understand what they were really facing. Every fence line, every irrigation ditch, every seemingly random piece of farm equipment had been placed with sniper warfare in mind. This wasn't just a farm, it was a shooting gallery designed by Delta Force's deadliest marksmen. Getting bold now, he muttered, noting their command vehicle's position near his east field. 847 yards. Elevation differential of 12 feet. Wind value holding steady. The same calculations that had once helped him set records in combat now served to protect his home. The first shot, when it came, was almost casual. The command vehicle's antenna disappeared in a precise demonstration of his capabilities. A warning, letting them know their command and control could be eliminated at any moment. He watched their reaction through his scope, noting their immediate tactical adjustment. They were learning, but too late. His second position, prepared years ago in the abandoned windmill, offered perfect coverage of their likely retreat routes. John moved like a shadow through his own terrain, using paths and approaches developed through years of farming. Each step calculated, each position offering maximum advantage. A cartel sniper team tried to establish their own position near his south fence. Good spot would have been perfect if this was just ordinary farmland. But John had selected every tree, every hedgerow, for precise tactical purposes. At 912 yards, with a slight crosswind, he eliminated their rifle first. A shot that would have been called impossible by anyone who didn't know his record. Through his scope, he watched their growing frustration. They'd come expecting to overwhelm an old farmer through superior numbers and firepower. Instead, they were being systematically picked apart by shots that seemed to come from nowhere. The Delta Force legend of John Miller was proving to be anything but exaggerated. His next series of shots were purely strategic: radiators, fuel tanks, tires. Each round placed with surgical precision, gradually eliminating their mobility. The cartel forces found themselves pinned down, unable to advance or retreat effectively, just like he'd planned when he'd first laid out these fields years ago. Should have taken no for an answer, he whispered, his voice carrying the calm certainty that had made him legendary in Delta Force. The morning sun had burned away the dew now, changing shooting conditions slightly. John adjusted accordingly, each calculation automatic after thousands of similar shots. His farm wasn't just land to him. It was his chosen peace, his retirement, his legacy. These fields represented everything he'd fought for during his military career. And now, those same hard-earned skills were defending that peace, one precision shot at a time. Dawn painted Montana's sky in shades of purple and gold as John Miller settled into his primary shooting position atop the grain silo. His weathered hands cradled the custom M24 with familiar precision, the same steady grip that had once made him a legend in Delta Force. Through his scope, he watched the cartel's final assault force assembling at the edge of his property. They brought everything this time. 50 men, heavy weapons, armored vehicles. Down below, his farm lay quiet, every building and piece of equipment positioned exactly where he needed them. 3 days of fighting had taught the cartel's forces to fear his accuracy. Now they were betting everything on one massive push. "Let's remind them why they call me Shadow," he muttered, adjusting his scope for the morning wind conditions. The first shot would be the most important, 847 yards to their command vehicle. Wind varying between 8 and 12 knots. Temperature 62 degrees. Humidity at 70%. Variables that had become instinct through decades of experience. The cartel commander emerged from his vehicle, gathering his men for the final briefing. John's finger rested lightly on the trigger, his breathing falling into the same measured rhythm that had once helped him set the Delta Force distance record. They thought numbers and firepower could overcome skill and experience. Time to show them how wrong they were. His first shot dropped their commander before the man could finish giving orders. The sound echoed across his fields like thunder, rolling back from the mountains as chaos erupted in the cartel ranks. Through his scope, John methodically selected his next targets. Each shot was deliberate, precision over speed, just as he'd learned in countless operations. The cartel forces split up, trying to advance through his wheat fields in small groups. But John had spent years planning for this moment. Every irrigation ditch was pre-ranged. Every fence line calculated for bullet drop. His farm wasn't just his home. It was the perfect killing ground for someone with his particular set of skills. 800 yards. 600. 400. Distance made no difference to a man who'd once made confirmed kills at over a mile. The cartel's professional mercenaries tried to maintain tactical formation, but they didn't understand the terrain. Didn't know how the morning sun would blind them at certain angles. Didn't realize every seemingly random piece of farm equipment had been placed to channel them exactly where he wanted them. "Age brings wisdom," John whispered, picking off their tactical team leader with a shot that seemed to defy physics. The remaining cartel forces finally broke, scrambling back toward their vehicles. But retreat wasn't an option he'd leave them. Not after they'd threatened his home, his peace, his chosen way of life. His final shots disabled their vehicles with surgical precision. The same accuracy that had once served his country now protected his small piece of Montana. As silence returned to his fields, John Miller rose stiffly from his position. His joints protested age had its price, but his hands remained steady. They always would. Below, his farm lay peaceful again, wheat fields waving gently in the morning breeze. The cartel had made a fatal mistake, assuming an old farmer would be an easy target. They'd learned too late that sometimes the deadliest predators were the ones who'd chosen to live quietly until forced to reveal themselves. Dawn painted Montana's sky in shades of gold as state police vehicles surrounded John Miller's farm. The old farmer sat calmly on his porch, a cup of coffee warming his weathered hands while tactical teams secured the perimeter. Spent brass from .300 Winchester Magnum rounds still glinted in the morning light, marking positions where cartel members had learned their final lesson. Sheriff Tom Matthews approached slowly, taking the precise placement of the fallen attackers. His trained eye recognized the work of a professional, each shot calculated, each position chosen with tactical perfection. "Quite a night's work, John," he said quietly, noting distances that made his department's best marksmen look like amateurs. "Just protecting my property," John replied, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he used at farmers' markets. But his eyes hadn't stopped scanning the tree line, decades of combat instinct still active. The nearest confirmed kill had been at 1,647 yards, a shot that would have been impossible for anyone who hadn't spent years perfecting their craft. FBI agents were discovering hidden sniper nests in the grain silos, positions that had been prepared years ago and maintained with military precision. Their lead investigator, Sarah Chen, studied the shooting angles with growing amazement. "These shots, they matched the legendary Delta Force sniper from Operation Silent Thunder," she said, turning to John with newfound understanding. "That was a lifetime ago," John responded, watching his cattle return to their normal grazing patterns. The animals had been well-trained, responding to last night's chaos exactly as he prepared them to. Even his livestock served tactical purposes when needed. Local farmers began arriving, drawn by news of the battle. They looked at their elderly neighbor with new eyes, finally understanding why their community had remained untouched by the cartel violence plaguing other regions. John had been quietly standing guard all along, his peaceful farming life masking a deadly sentry. "Found their surveillance logs," Deputy Roberts reported, holding up documents recovered from the cartel vehicles. "They've been watching the farm for weeks." Called him the old gringo farmer. Never suspected. His voice trailed off as he calculated distances to the fallen attackers. The shots would have been challenging for a sniper in their prime, let alone a 63-year-old farmer. John sipped his coffee, watching federal teams photograph evidence. His fields would need attention today. The corn wouldn't wait just because he'd spent the night eliminating cartel threats. The rhythm of farm life had always appealed to him after years of high-stakes operations. There was peace in working the land, even if he'd had to defend that peace with skills earned in darker places. "Pentagon's called," Sarah mentioned carefully. "When they heard the shots matched your old Delta Force records." She paused, noting how John's posture remained relaxed but alert. "They're reopening some classified files. Your missions are still required reading at sniper school." A smile touched John's weathered face. "Let them study the old reports." His best shots would remain unrecorded, simple entries in agricultural logs marking the nights he defended his chosen home. Sometimes the deadliest sniper was the one who chose to disappear, vanishing into the quiet rhythms of rural life until forced to demonstrate why he'd earned his legendary status. Spring wheat rippled like a golden ocean across John Miller's fields, 6 months after the cartel's final assault on his farm. The bullet holes in his grain silos had been patched, the spent brass collected from his shooting positions, the tactical modifications to his irrigation ditches subtly maintained. To passing travelers, it looked like any other Montana ranch. That was exactly how John wanted it. Sheriff Mike Thompson's patrol car kicked up dust along the property's main access road, his weekly check-in now more courtesy than concern. The local law enforcement had developed a new appreciation for strategic planning since John had quietly begun advising them on rural tactical operations. "Got another group of state police recruits requesting training," Mike mentioned as John poured coffee in the farmhouse kitchen. The sheriff's eyes drifted to the distant ridge where a cartel sniper team had once set up, only to be eliminated by shots that local officers still discussed in whispered tones. That last group you worked with has the highest marksmanship scores in department history. John nodded, his weathered hand steady on his coffee cup. The back 40 of his property had been subtly modified into one of the most sophisticated long-range shooting facilities in the country, though it still looked like ordinary farmland to the untrained eye. Just like the grain silos still concealed perfectly maintained sniper hides, and the old tractor shed housed a state-of-the-art reloading station. Cartels pulled completely out of 3 states, Mike continued. Word got around about what happened here. Nobody wants to risk running into the Farmer's Ridge ghost again. John allowed himself a slight smile. The nickname had stuck, though few knew the full story of that final night when his farm's tactical advantages had helped him break his own distance record from his Delta Force days. The intelligence community had quietly documented the engagement as a masterclass in rural warfare. Through his kitchen window, John watched his neighbor's children playing safely in distant fields. The peace he'd fought to protect had returned to the valley. His farm stood as an invisible guardian, its defenses maintained with the same precision he'd once applied to his Delta Force operations. That young couple buying the Peterson place, Mike mentioned carefully, former Marines, said they chose this valley specifically because of what happened here. The legacy of John Miller's farm had spread through veteran circles. A quiet message that some places were worth defending, that skills learned in combat could protect peace rather than destroy it. That sometimes the deadliest predators were the ones that appeared most harmless. As the sheriff drove away, John walked his property's perimeter. Each fence post, each tree line, each natural feature had proven its worth during the cartel's assault. Now they stood peaceful again, marking the boundaries of a place where evil had tried to take root and found itself outmatched by an old farmer who was far more than he seemed. The sun set over Montana's hills as John Miller, former Delta Force sniper, now simply a farmer again, completed his evening chores. His legendary shots had once again served their purpose, not for war this time, but for peace. His farm remained his sanctuary, its defenses invisible but maintained, ready if ever needed again. But for now, there was wheat to tend and peace to enjoy, and a quiet legacy to maintain in his own careful way. Well, my friends, that's our story for today. I hope it brought a little joy to your afternoon. Don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps make sure you never miss a new story. God bless, and I'll see you all next time.